The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Concordia, Nebraska. As Hope Oakes pressed her back against the wall of the general store, the cold muzzle of Sheriff Winter's revolver digging into her temple. In front of her, a mob of 30 or more townsfolk had gathered, their faces twisted with hunger and desperation, shouting for justice against the woman they claimed had brought drought and ruin to their once prosperous farming community. "She's a witch!" cried Elmer Jenkins, his weathered face flushed with anger. "6 months without proper rain since she arrived. Our crops are withered, our children hungry." Hope trembled but kept her chin high. At 26, she had known hardship before, but nothing like this becoming the scapegoat for a town's misfortune simply because she was different, because she kept to herself and practiced herbal medicine that some found strange. "My pa says she was seen dancing under the full moon." A young boy shouted from the back of the crowd. "Says she's been cursing the land." Sheriff Winters, a man driven more by the will of the crowd than any sense of justice, pressed the gun harder against her temple. "What do you have to say for yourself, Miss Oakes?" Before Hope could answer, the crowd parted. A tall figure on horseback emerged, silhouetted against the setting sun. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. He walked with purpose toward the gathering, his face partially obscured by the brim of his Stetson. "What in God's name is happening here?" His voice carried across the street, deep and commanding. Sheriff Winters lowered his gun slightly. "This ain't your business, Gabriel." Gabriel Osborne, the county's most successful cattle rancher, stepped closer, finally revealing his face to Hope. Strong-jawed, with intense green eyes and several days' worth of stubble, he looked directly at her before turning to face the crowd. "Looks to me like you're about to hang a woman without trial," Gabriel said, his hand resting casually on the holster at his hip. "Last I checked, that wasn't how justice worked in Concordia." "She's brought the drought," Mrs. Pickering cried out, clutching her shawl around her bony shoulders. "My Thomas hasn't had a decent crop in months. We're starving while she thrives." Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "You think one woman controls the weather?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I've seen drought before, back in '71. Started long before Miss Oakes ever set foot in Nebraska territory." The year was 1875, and while the war had been over for a decade, new battles were constantly being fought against nature, against change, against anyone who seemed different. "Stand aside, Osborne," Sheriff Winters commanded, regaining some confidence. "The town's decided." "The town." Gabriel looked around at the faces in the crowd, some angry, some frightened, all desperate. Or a bunch of scared farmers looking for someone to blame. He moved deliberately, positioning himself between Hope and the mob, his back now to her. Hope could smell leather and horse and something else, something clean, like pine soap emanating from the stranger defending her. She had seen him before, riding through town, but they had never spoken. She knew his reputation, though fair in business, generous to those in need, and not a man to be trifled with. "You're all acting like fools," Gabriel continued, addressing the crowd. "If you want to save your farms, you need irrigation, not a scapegoat." "She practices witchcraft," Elmer insisted. "My wife saw her gathering plants in the moonlight, chanting strange words." Hope found her voice at last. "I was collecting night-blooming flowers for medicine. Your wife came to me last winter when your youngest had the croup, Mr. Jenkins." Her voice was steady despite her fear. Those strange words were prayers for healing. Gabriel glanced back at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Sheriff Winters stepped forward. "The council's decided, Osborne. She's to leave Concordia by sundown or face consequences." "What council?" Gabriel demanded. Did you hold a proper town meeting? Did everyone vote? He scanned the crowd again. I see Elmer and the Pickerings, but where's Doc Miller? Where's Reverend Hayes? Where are all the folks Miss Oakes has helped with her medicines? A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked down, shame beginning to register on their faces. This isn't justice, Gabriel said more softly. This is fear talking. Hope watched as uncertainty crept into the expressions of some townsfolk. Others, however, seemed unmoved. The drought is real enough, a voice called from the back. Gabriel nodded. Yes, it is, and it's affected my ranch too, but I've seen these cycles before they come and go. What doesn't help is turning on each other. He turned to Sheriff Winters. Put that gun away before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your days. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the wooden sign hanging above the general store, swinging gently in the hot, dry breeze. Then, slowly, Sheriff Winters lowered his weapon. You're taking responsibility for her, then? The sheriff asked, holstering his revolver without hesitation. Gabriel nodded. I am. If any harm comes to this town, it won't be because of Miss Oakes, Gabriel finished firmly. He turned to Hope, offering his hand. Madam, I think it might be best if you came with me for now. Hope hesitated, looking from Gabriel's outstretched hand to the still restless crowd. I have done nothing wrong, she said, her voice carrying across the street. I believe you, Gabriel replied quietly. But right now, you're not safe here. The sincerity in his eyes convinced her. Hope took his hand, feeling the calluses of a man who worked his land himself despite his wealth. Gabriel led her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. Can you ride? He asked. Yes, she replied, allowing him to help her mount. Gabriel turned back to the crowd one last time. When the rains come, and they will come, I expect apologies to Miss Oakes from every single one of you. He swung up into the saddle behind her, reaching around to take the reins. As they rode away from town, Hope felt the tension in her body slowly begin to ease. The warmth of the man behind her, solid and steady, provided a strange comfort she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said softly. You didn't have to do that. Actually, I did, Gabriel replied, his breath warm against her ear. My pa taught me that a man who stands by while injustice happens might as well be holding the rope himself. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats on the packed earth almost hypnotic. The vast Nebraska prairie stretched out around them, golden in the late afternoon light. Where are we going? Hope finally asked. My ranch. It's about 5 miles east of town. You'll be safe there until this nonsense blows over. Hope stiffened slightly. I can't impose on you like that. If you could just take me to my cabin, and leave you alone for them to come back after dark. Not a chance, Miss Oakes. Hope, she corrected him. If you're going to be my protector, you might as well use my given name. She felt rather than saw his smile. Hope, he repeated, fitting. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the Osborne ranch came into view. It was larger than Hope had imagined, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs and stone, several outbuildings, corrals filled with cattle and horses, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. A windmill turned lazily in the distance, pumping water from deep beneath the parched earth. Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch, Gabriel said, some pride evident in his voice. As they approached, a few ranch hands looked up from their work, curiosity plain on their faces at the sight of their boss returning with a woman. Gabriel dismounted first, then reached up to help Hope down. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, and for a brief moment they stood close enough that Hope could see flecks of gold in his green eyes. Mr. Osborne. A gray-haired woman came hustling out of the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. We weren't expecting you back, so. She stopped short at the sight of Hope. "Mrs. Landry, this is Miss Hope Oakes," Gabriel said. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Hope, this is Mrs. Landry, the finest housekeeper and cook this side of the Mississippi." The older woman's eyes widened in recognition. The healer woman from town. Hope tensed, waiting for the usual suspicion. "Oh, thank the Lord," Mrs. Landry continued, surprising her. "My arthritis has been acting up something fierce. I've been meaning to come see you, but my nephew said folks in town were talking nonsense about you." She shook her head disapprovingly. "People always fear what they don't understand." Gabriel smiled. "Get a room ready for Miss Oakes, would you? And perhaps some hot water for washing up." "Of course. Come along, dear," Mrs. Landry said, gesturing for Hope to follow her into the house. Hope glanced back at Gabriel, who tipped his hat to her. "I need to check on some things in the barn. I'll see you at supper." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly refined, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books, more books than Hope had seen outside of a proper city library. "You look surprised," Mrs. Landry commented as she led Hope upstairs. Mr. Osborne's mother was a schoolteacher from Boston. She insisted on bringing civilization with her when she married his father and moved west. "Were they?" Hope began, curious about the past tense Mrs. Landry had used. "Both gone now, God rest their souls. Yellow fever 6 years ago. Left the ranch to Mr. Gabriel. He was just 22 then, but he's built it into something his parents would be proud of." Mrs. Landry showed Hope to a pleasant bedroom with a real feather bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. "Thank you," Hope said, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day's events. "I won't stay long. I don't want to cause any trouble for Mr. Osborne." "Nonsense," Mrs. Landry said firmly. "That boy could use some trouble of your kind." She winked before bustling out of the room. Hope sank onto the bed, her mind replaying the events in town. She had come to Concordia a year ago, after her parents' deaths. With nowhere else to go, she had used her small inheritance to buy a modest cabin at the edge of town, intending to support herself with the herbal medicine skills her grandmother had taught her. At first, the townspeople had cautiously accepted her remedies for coughs, fevers, and various ailments. But as the drought worsened and crops failed, whispers began. Why was her small garden still green when others withered? Why did she gather plants at night? What were those strange concoctions she brewed? Hope sighed, knowing the answers were simple. Hard work, careful water conservation, gathering certain herbs when they were most potent, and recipes handed down through generations. But fear had turned simple explanations into sinister accusations. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Landry entered with a copper tub and 2 ranch hands carrying buckets of steaming water. "Supper's in an hour," she said. "Take your time getting freshened up." After her bath, Hope put on the cleanest of her 2 dresses, a simple blue cotton that had faded from too many washings but was still presentable. She braided her long chestnut hair and pinched her cheeks to bring some color to her face, then chided herself for caring how she looked. When she descended the stairs, she found Gabriel waiting in the parlor, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He stood when she entered, and for a moment they simply regarded each other. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Rested," he finished. "Thank you," Hope replied, a small smile playing at her lips. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Osborne. Gabriel, please." He gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we?" Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Besides Gabriel and Hope, there was Mrs. Landry and Mr. Peterson, Gabriel's foreman, a taciturn but kind man in his 50s. The conversation flowed easily, carefully avoiding the day's drama in town. "Miss Oakes is a healer," Gabriel told Peterson. Probably knows more about treating livestock ailments than Doc Miller from what I've heard. Peterson perked up. Is that so? We've got a mare with an infected hoof that's not responding to the usual treatments. I'd be happy to take a look, Hope offered. And please call me Hope. You do that? Peterson asked, surprised. After how folks in town have treated you, a sick animal shouldn't suffer because of human foolishness, Hope replied simply. Gabriel studied her with new interest. Most people would be bitter. What good would that do? Hope asked, meeting his gaze. Besides, I can't afford to hold grudges when I have so few friends already. You have at least 2 more now, Gabriel said quietly. After supper, Gabriel suggested they sit on the porch to enjoy the cooler evening air. He brought out 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, offering one to Hope. Just a small one, she said. I'm not much of a drinker. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Will you tell me about your healing? Gabriel finally asked. I'd like to understand. Hope considered his request. Most men wouldn't ask. They'd either dismiss her knowledge as women's superstition or fear it as something unnatural. My grandmother taught me, she began. She learned from her mother and so on back for generations. It's mostly about knowing which plants heal what ailments, when to gather them, how to prepare them. There's nothing magical about it, despite what people think. But you do pray over your remedies, Hope nodded. I believe that intention matters. A medicine given with care works better than one given coldly. She took a small sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. My grandmother would say that healing happens when knowledge, nature, and faith work together. Gabriel considered this. Sounds more like wisdom than witchcraft to me. The line between the two depends on who's doing the judging, Hope replied wryly. They talked late into the night, finding surprising common ground. Gabriel had traveled east for schooling before returning to the ranch after his parents' deaths. He spoke of his dreams for the land, of introducing new cattle breeds more suited to the harsh climate, of building a community that could withstand the boom and bust cycles of farming and ranching. Hope told him of her childhood in Iowa, of losing her parents to influenza, of her decision to start fresh where no one knew her. And you chose Concordia, Gabriel said with a chuckle. Perhaps not your wisest decision. It seemed peaceful, Hope defended, smiling despite herself. And the land around it reminded me of home. Well, Gabriel said, standing and offering his hand to help her up, for whatever it's worth, I'm glad your poor choice of towns led you here tonight. His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, and Hope felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the whiskey. Good night, Gabriel, she said softly, withdrawing her hand. Good night, Hope, he replied, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer before she turned to go inside. Hope slept better that night than she had in months, lulled by the sense of safety and the memory of green eyes that looked at her with respect rather than suspicion. The next morning she rose early, accustomed to starting her day with the sun. To her surprise, Gabriel was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and account book spread before him. You're an early riser, he commented, standing to pour her a cup of coffee. Farm daughter, she explained, accepting the cup gratefully. Old habits. I thought you might want to see that mare Peterson mentioned, Gabriel said. After breakfast, of course. Hope nodded. I'd like that, but I should return to my cabin soon. I have medicines brewing that need tending. Gabriel's expression darkened. It's not safe yet. I can't hide forever, Hope replied, and I won't be run off my land by fear and ignorance. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least let me send some men with you to make sure everything's all right at your place. And to bring back anything you need. That's very kind, Hope said, touched by his concern. After a hearty breakfast prepared by Mrs. Landry, Hope accompanied Gabriel to the barn where Peterson was already examining the mare's hoof. The horse was clearly in pain, her coat dull and her eyes lacking the usual luster. Hope approached slowly, speaking softly to the animal as she got closer. "Hello, beautiful," she murmured, allowing the mare to catch her scent. "Let's see what's troubling you." With gentle hands, she examined the infected hoof, noting the heat and swelling. "How long has she been like this?" she asked Peterson. "Started about a week ago. Got worse these past few days." Hope nodded, thinking. "I need hot water, clean cloths, salt, and if you have any, honey." Gabriel raised an eyebrow but immediately sent a stable boy running for the supplies. "Honey?" Peterson asked skeptically. "It draws out infection," Hope explained, "and prevents new infection from setting in. The ancient Egyptians used it for wounds." When the supplies arrived, Hope set to work, first cleaning the hoof thoroughly, then creating a poultice of honey mixed with certain herbs she found growing near the barn. She worked with confident efficiency, her hands sure and gentle. "Keep this wrapped for today," she instructed Peterson after applying the poultice. "Tomorrow, wash it clean and apply a fresh poultice. I'll prepare enough for several days." "You seem mighty sure this will work," Peterson commented. "It will," Hope said simply. "The infection will be noticeably better by tomorrow evening and gone within a week if you follow my instructions." Gabriel watched her with undisguised admiration. "Where did you learn about horses?" "My father raised them," Hope explained. "Not many, just a few. But enough that I learned to treat common ailments." After finishing with the mare, Gabriel showed Hope around the rest of the ranch. It was impressive, nearly 2,000 acres of land, hundreds of cattle, and a well-managed operation that employed 15 men year-round. "You've built something remarkable here," Hope commented as they stood on a rise overlooking the eastern pasture. "I've been fortunate," Gabriel replied, "and I had a good foundation to build on. Still, many men would have sold off their inheritance and moved to a city. Why stay?" Gabriel gazed out at the land, his expression softening. "This land gets in your blood. The openness, the challenge of it, the way it changes with the seasons but always remains itself underneath." He glanced at her. "Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all," Hope said softly. "It sounds like love." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood what it meant to be connected to the land in ways that went beyond mere ownership. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Peterson, riding hard from the direction of the house. "Riders coming," he called out as he approached. "From town." Gabriel's expression hardened. "How many?" "5, including the sheriff." Gabriel turned to Hope. "Stay here with Peterson. I'll deal with this." "No," Hope said firmly, putting a hand on his arm. "This is my fight too." After a brief hesitation, Gabriel nodded. "All right, but stay close." They rode back to the main house together, arriving just as the riders from town pulled up in the yard. Sheriff Winters was there, along with Elmer Jenkins, Mr. Pickering, and 2 other men Hope recognized from town. "Osborne," the sheriff called, dismounting. "We need to talk." Gabriel dismounted as well, helping Hope down before stepping slightly in front of her, protective but not dismissive. "Talk then," Gabriel said coolly. Sheriff Winters adjusted his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Town council met properly this morning. They've decided Miss Oakes needs to stand trial for her activities." "What activities would those be exactly?" Gabriel demanded. "Healing the sick, growing plants, living alone as a woman of independent means." "There's been complaints," the sheriff insisted. "Strange noises from her cabin at night, animals dying mysteriously near her property, and there's the drought." "The drought affects 5 counties," Gabriel pointed out. Are you suggesting Miss Oakes has bewitched half of Nebraska territory? I'm just doing my job, the sheriff said defensively. Your job is to uphold the law, Gabriel replied, not persecute innocent women based on superstition. Elmer Jenkins stepped forward. My boy's cow died 2 days after she gave that creature one of her concoctions. The cow was already dying of milk fever, Hope responded calmly. Your son came to me in tears, begging for help. I told him it might be too late, but I gave him medicine to try anyway. See, Jenkins exclaimed. She admits it. Gabriel shook his head in disgust. What exactly are you charging her with, Sheriff? There's no law against practicing medicine, even if you call it witchcraft. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably again. The council's concerned about public safety. They want her examined by Doc Miller and Reverend Hayes. For what purpose? Gabriel demanded, to determine if she's practicing dark arts. Hope felt a chill run down her spine. Such examinations rarely ended well for the women subjected to them. Absolutely not, Gabriel stated flatly. It ain't up to you, Osborne, Pickering interjected. The council's voted. The council has no legal authority to order such an examination, Gabriel pointed out, and I won't allow it on my property. The tension in the yard was palpable. Peterson and several ranch hands had quietly positioned themselves around the perimeter, hands near their weapons. You're choosing her over your neighbors, the sheriff asked incredulously. You've lived here your whole life, Osborne. I'm choosing justice over mob rule, Gabriel replied evenly. And if standing for that makes me unpopular, so be it. The standoff continued for several tense moments before Hope stepped forward, placing herself beside Gabriel rather than behind him. I have nothing to hide, she said clearly. I will answer any reasonable questions here and now before witnesses. But I will not submit to an examination based on ignorance and fear. The sheriff looked uncertain, glancing at his companions for guidance. Ask your questions, Gabriel prompted, or leave my property. After a moment's hesitation, Reverend Hayes, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Miss Oakes, do you worship the Christian God? I do, Hope answered truthfully. Though I believe he shows himself in many ways, including through the healing properties of plants he created. And these rituals people have seen you performing. Prayer and careful preparation of medicines, Hope explained. Nothing more sinister than what your wife does when she follows a recipe for bread, Reverend. Several questions followed about her background, her medical knowledge, her practices. Hope answered each one calmly and honestly, occasionally correcting misunderstandings or elaborating when necessary. Throughout the impromptu interrogation, Gabriel remained by her side, occasionally adding context or clarification, but mostly allowing Hope to speak for herself. His steady presence gave her strength. Finally, the questions began to wind down, and even the most suspicious of the men seemed less certain of their accusations. There's still the matter of the drought, Elmer Jenkins persisted, though with less conviction than before. At that moment, a distant rumble of thunder sounded from the west. All heads turned to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the first promise of rain in months. Gabriel couldn't help but smile. Seems like your witch's powers are failing, Elmer. Or perhaps she's decided to end the drought now that you've exposed her. Some of the ranch hands chuckled, and even the sheriff's mouth twitched slightly. This doesn't change anything, Jenkins muttered, but it was clear that the momentum had shifted. I think it changes everything, Gabriel said firmly. You've heard Miss Oakes' answers. You've seen that she's an educated, God-fearing woman who uses her knowledge to help others. And now, by God's grace, it appears the drought may finally be breaking. He looked at each man in turn. So I suggest you all ride back to town and report that the witch is nothing more than a skilled healer who deserves your gratitude, not your persecution." The men looked at each other uncertainly. Finally, the sheriff sighed. "I'll tell the council we found no evidence of witchcraft," he conceded. "But Osborne, you do well to consider how this looks, you taking her side against the whole town." "I'm taking the side of reason and decency," Gabriel replied evenly, "and I'd hope any good man would do the same." As the riders departed, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour that had everyone rushing for shelter. Gabriel and Hope made a dash for the porch, arriving breathless and already half-soaked. For a moment, they simply stood there, watching the blessed rain fall on the parched earth, listening to its rhythm on the roof. "Perfect timing," Gabriel said with a smile, water dripping from his hat brim. Hope laughed a free, joyous sound that Gabriel realized he'd never heard from her before. "Even I'm not claiming credit for this," she said, gesturing at the downpour. "No," Gabriel agreed, his eyes warm as they rested on her face, glowing with rain and happiness. "But I might give you credit for bringing a different kind of sunshine to this place." Hope felt herself blush under his gaze. "I should check on that mare," she said, needing a moment to compose herself. "In this rain, Peterson can handle it. You'll catch your death." Gabriel ushered her inside where Mrs. Landry immediately began fussing over them, bringing towels and insisting they change into dry clothes. When Hope came back downstairs in a borrowed dress from Mrs. Landry's niece, she found Gabriel in the study, standing by the window watching the rain transform his land. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Hope said, coming to stand beside him. "It is," he agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the rain-soaked landscape. Hope felt something shift between them, a tentative possibility opening like the parched earth receiving rain. "I should return to my cabin tomorrow," she said softly, testing. Gabriel turned to face her fully. "If that's what you wish, but I want you to know you're welcome here, Hope, not just as someone needing protection, but as someone I'd like to know better." Hope studied his face, finding sincerity in his green eyes. "I'd like that too," she admitted, "but I need to stand my ground with the town. I can't hide forever." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "Then let me court you properly. Let the town see that I respect you, value you." "It won't change everyone's mind, but it might make a difference." "Court me," Hope repeated, surprised by his directness. "Unless I've misread things between us," Gabriel said, suddenly looking less certain. Hope smiled softly. "You haven't misread anything, but are you sure?" "The wealthiest rancher in the county courting the suspected witch, it will cause talk," Gabriel laughed. "Let them talk. I've never much cared what others think of me, and I care even less now." He took her hand gently in his. "What do you say, Hope Oakes? Will you allow me to call on you?" Hope felt her heart quicken. After months of loneliness and suspicion, the prospect of connection, especially with this good, brave man, was almost overwhelming. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." The rain continued to fall through the night and into the next day, a gentle, soaking rain that promised renewal for the parched land. By morning, the creek that gave the ranch its name was flowing again, and the pastures already showed hints of green where before there had been only dust and straw. True to her word, Hope insisted on returning to her cabin the following day, once the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle. Gabriel accompanied her, along with 2 ranch hands for additional security. As they approached the small cabin at the edge of town, Hope felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This was her home, her independence. She would not be driven from it. The cabin appeared undisturbed from the outside, its small garden already perking up from the rain. Inside, however, was a different story. Someone had entered during her absence, overturning furniture and smashing several jars of medicine. Hope surveyed the damage in silence, her face expressionless. "I'll find who did this," Gabriel promised, anger evident in his voice. "It doesn't matter," Hope replied, already beginning to set things right. "Nothing irreplaceable was destroyed." "It matters to me," Gabriel insisted. "This was a violation, Hope." She paused in her cleaning to look at him, touched by his indignation on her behalf. "Thank you. But right now, I'd rather focus on rebuilding than retribution." Gabriel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're a remarkable woman, Hope Oakes." Together, they set the cabin to rights, with Gabriel's men helping to repair a broken window and door latch. By late afternoon, the place was secure again, though many of Hope's medicines would need to be remade. "I should be getting back to the ranch," Gabriel said reluctantly as the sun began to set. "Will you be all right here?" "I will," Hope assured him. "But I'll welcome your visit tomorrow if you still intend to call on me." Gabriel smiled. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." He hesitated, then leaned down to place a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Until tomorrow, then." Hope watched him ride away, her hand unconsciously touching the spot his lips had brushed, a small smile playing on her lips. True to his word, Gabriel returned the next day, properly dressed for courting, with flowers picked from Mrs. Landry's garden. His visit caused quite a stir among the townspeople who happened to see the wealthy rancher tying his horse outside the suspected witch's cabin. Over the following weeks, Gabriel's courtship of Hope became the talk of Concordia. Some disapproved, of course, but others began to reconsider their opinions of the healer woman. If Gabriel Osborne, a man known for his good judgment, valued her, perhaps there was more to her than they had assumed. It helped that the rain continued intermittently, bringing new life to the struggling farms. By the time autumn arrived, the crisis had passed, and many were looking forward to a modest harvest after all. Hope's practice slowly began to recover as well. First came those desperate enough to risk association with her: a child with fever, an elderly man with crippling pain, a woman struggling after a difficult birth. Each success brought more patients, and gradually the suspicion began to fade. Gabriel's support never wavered. He called on Hope regularly, escorted her to church, where Reverend Hayes, to his credit, welcomed her warmly, and made it clear to everyone that he held her in the highest regard. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Hope came to know Gabriel as a man of integrity and vision, someone who cared deeply about his land and the people who worked it. Gabriel discovered in Hope a woman of remarkable strength and compassion, whose knowledge and healing gifts amazed him. By the first snowfall, they were deeply in love, though neither had spoken the words aloud. The opportunity came on a crisp December evening. Gabriel had invited Hope to dinner at the ranch, and afterwards suggested a short walk despite the cold. "I have something to show you," he explained, leading her toward a small rise not far from the main house. At the top of the rise stood a sturdy young oak tree, clearly recently planted. "What's this?" Hope asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "A beginning," Gabriel said softly. "When I was a boy, my father told me that the Osbornes plant an oak tree to mark each new chapter in our family's story. My grandparents planted one when they claimed this land. My parents planted one when they married." He took Hope's gloved hands in his. "I'd like to plant this one for us, if you'll have me." Hope looked from the tree to Gabriel's face, her heart full. "I love you, Hope Oakes," Gabriel continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "These past months have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, kind, wise beyond your years. I want to spend my life with you, learning from you, building something beautiful together." He knelt in the snow, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me?" Hope felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Gabriel Osborne, I will marry you." Gabriel rose and gathered her in his arms, kissing her tenderly, then with increasing passion as she responded in kind. "I love you," Hope said when they finally parted, both breathless. "I never thought I would find someone who could understand me, accept all of me, but you do." "Always," Gabriel promised, holding her close against the winter chill. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the small church in Concordia. To Hope's surprise, the church was full. Not only Gabriel's ranch hands and friends attended, but many townspeople as well, including some who had been part of the mob that threatened her life just months before. Elmer Jenkins even approached her after the ceremony, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Mrs. Osborne, he corrected himself. "I owe you an apology. My boy's calf took sick last week with the same thing that killed his cow. Doc Miller couldn't do nothing for it, but your medicine saved the creature." He stared at his boots. "I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry for it." Hope regarded him for a moment, then smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I accept your apology." As they departed the church amid cheers and thrown rice, Hope leaned close to her new husband. "That might be the greatest wedding gift anyone could give me," she said. Gabriel squeezed her hand. "Second greatest," he corrected with a smile. "I have something else for you at home." That something else turned out to be the deed to 20 acres adjoining the ranch, which included a sunny slope perfect for growing medicinal herbs. "Your own healing garden," Gabriel explained as they stood on the land the following day. "Big enough to grow whatever you need, close enough to the house that you can work here and still be near our home." Hope was speechless, deeply moved by her husband's understanding of her needs. "And," Gabriel continued, "I thought perhaps we might build a proper clinic someday, where you could see patients more comfortably than in our home or theirs." Hope threw her arms around him. "Have I told you today that I love you, Gabriel Osborne?" he pretended to consider. "Not in the last hour or so." "Well, I do," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "More than I can say." In the years that followed, Hope and Gabriel built a life together that exceeded both their dreams. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Gabriel's innovative ranching methods and Hope's knowledge of plants and animals, creating a model operation that others sought to emulate. Hope's reputation as a healer grew beyond Concordia, bringing patients from neighboring counties, and even occasionally from as far as Omaha. The clinic Gabriel had promised was built within 2 years, a welcoming place of healing that combined Hope's herbal knowledge with the best of modern medicine. Their first child, a son they named Samuel, after Gabriel's father, was born in the winter of 1877. He was followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and a girl, William and Elizabeth. Their family was completed in 1882, with the arrival of another daughter, Rachel. The children grew up understanding both their father's love of the land and their mother's healing gifts. Each found their own path, Samuel eventually taking over management of the ranch, William becoming a doctor, Elizabeth a teacher, and Rachel following most closely in her mother's footsteps as an herbal healer. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gabriel and Hope stood once again beside the oak tree they had planted the night of their engagement. It was a sturdy tree now, its branches reaching skyward, its roots deep in the Nebraska soil. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hope asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they watched their children and grandchildren playing in the distance. "That night when you rode into town and found a mob ready to hang me," Gabriel shook his head, his arm tightening around her waist. "I knew I had to protect you. I never imagined you would end up protecting all of us in return." He kissed the top of her head, now streaked with silver among the chestnut. "You've brought more healing to this land and its people than you know, Hope Osborne." "We did it together," Hope replied, turning in his arms to face him. Though lines now framed his green eyes and gray peppered his hair, she still saw the brave, principled man who had stood between her and danger all those years ago. "Everything good in my life began the day you found me." "Everything good in mine, too," Gabriel said softly, lowering his head to kiss her with the same tenderness as their first kiss in the snow. Behind them, the oak tree stood witness, a living testament to love that had taken root against all odds and flourished, bringing life and healing to everything it touched. As the sun set over Willow Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across land that had known both drought and abundance, Gabriel and Hope walked hand in hand back to the home they had built together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the deeper home of family, purpose, and abiding love. And in Concordia, when people spoke of Hope Osborne, they no longer whispered of witchcraft and curses. Instead, they told stories of healing hands and a generous heart, of the woman who had overcome prejudice with compassion, and of the man who had stood beside her when it mattered most. For the children of the county, their story became something of a legend, a reminder that courage sometimes meant standing alone against a crowd, that love could overcome fear, and that true healing began with understanding rather than judgment. In time, other women with knowledge of plants and healing came to study with Hope, creating a legacy that would continue long after she and Gabriel were gone. The clinic they had built became a training ground for healers who combined traditional knowledge with modern medicine, serving the community for generations to come. Their greatest legacy, however, was the example they set of standing firm for what was right, of believing in each other when the world doubted, and of building something beautiful from the ashes of prejudice and fear. In the spring of their 30th year together, when the prairie was once again covered in wildflowers and new calves dotted the pastures, Gabriel and Hope planted another oak tree, this one to mark the beginning of their grandchildren's stewardship of the land. "The roots go deep," Gabriel told his oldest grandson as they tamped soil around the sapling. "Just like family, just like love." Hope watched them, her heart full, knowing that whatever storms might come, their legacy would stand firm like the oak trees that now marked the milestones of their life together, reaching toward heaven while remaining firmly rooted in the soil of Willow Creek Ranch.